There are nights when the cold cuts deeper than wind and snow ever could. Nights when a single knock at the door changes everything. This is the story of a man who lived in silence, a woman who survived in shadows, and a child who witnessed something no child should ever have to see. What happened on that frozen prairie would test every belief about strength, mercy, and what it truly means to protect someone when the whole world turns against you. Hollis Miller was 36 years old, but the weight he carried made him seem much older. He was a widower with no children, no family, just a darkened cabin and empty fields stretching endlessly in every direction. People in town knew him by his size before they knew his name. They called him the giant, talked about his strength like it was something to fear. But they never saw the truth. Hollis wasn't dangerous. He was just, alone. Deeply, achingly alone that he didn't visit the saloon or share meals with neighbors. His days were marked by fence posts and firewood, his nights by the crackle of flames and the echo of his own footsteps. The chair across from him stayed empty. The other side of his bed remained cold. He had learned to live with silence the way some men learn to live with scars, but on this particular winter evening, that silence shattered. The knock came just after dark. Not the slow tap of a neighbor or the casual greeting of a passerby. This was frantic, desperate, the kind of knock that carries terror in its rhythm. Hollis set down the log he was holding and moved toward the door, every sense suddenly alert. No one came to his cabin after sundown. Not in winter. Not without a reason that clawed at their chest that he opened the door, and there she stood. A little girl, no older than 7, shivering in a torn dress that was far too thin for the bitter cold. Her hair was tangled with frost, her cheeks raw and red. Her boots were so worn that her toes peeked through, pale and trembling. But it wasn't the cold that made her eyes so wide. It was fear. The kind of fear that lives in your bones long after the danger passes. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, fragile as glass. They beat my mama. She's hurt real bad. Please, please help her. The words hung in the frozen air between them, sharp and unbearable. Hollis felt something crack open inside him, a place he thought had closed forever. The girl didn't cry. She was past tears. She just stood there, holding herself together with a strength no child should ever need. What's your mama's name? Hollis asked, his voice low and steady. Mary Ellen, she whispered. Mary Ellen Carter. They left her at the shack by Miller's Creek. She can't get up. I didn't know where else to go. Mary Ellen Carter. Hollis knew that name. He'd seen her in town a few times, always with her head down, always walking a step behind her husband. Elias Carter was the kind of man who used his voice like a weapon and his fists like punctuation. Everyone knew. And like most people, Hollis had turned away. It wasn't his business. Wasn't his home. That's what men told themselves when they didn't want to see, but now, standing in front of this shivering child, he couldn't turn away. That he knelt down so his height wouldn't frighten her. What's your name? Laura May, she said softly. Hollis studied the bruises on her small arms, the way she clutched her torn sleeve like it might keep her safe. Something hardened in him then. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter. Something more dangerous. A decision. Get inside, he told her. I'll bring your mama home. Laura hesitated, unsure if she could trust a man so large, so silent. But when the wind nearly knocked her over, she stepped past him into the warmth. Hollis grabbed his coat and walked out into the night, his boots carving a steady trail through the snow. Miller's Creek was a mile away through bare trees that rattled like bones in the wind. The cold bit at his face, but he didn't slow down. He didn't need a lantern. The moonlight and his memory of the land were enough. When the shack came into view, sagging and broken, he pushed the door open. The air inside reeked of damp straw and stale whiskey. In the corner, lying on a pile of rags, was Mary Ellen. Even in the shadows, her injuries told the story. Her face was swollen and bruised, one eye nearly shut. Her lips were split, her wrists raw where rope had burned the skin. But when she looked up at him, her gaze wasn't pleading. It was proud. Stubborn. As if she would rather die where she lay than beg for help. Hollis stepped closer, his shadow filling the small room. Mary Ellen's voice came out hoarse and thin. "You shouldn't be here. People will talk. They'll ruin you." He knelt slowly, his weight making the floorboards creak. He looked into her bruised face and said quietly, "Let them." He slid his arms beneath her, lifting her as gently as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped at the sudden movement but didn't protest. Maybe she was too weak. Maybe, for the first time in years, she felt safe enough to let go. He wrapped his coat around her and carried her through the snow, her head resting against his chest, her breath shallow and warm against the cold. Back at the cabin, Laura ran to the door, her small hands clasped tight. When she saw her mother in Hollis's arms, her face lit up with a relief so powerful it seemed to age her and soften her all at once. Hollis carried Mary Ellen inside and laid her on his bed, the only bed in the cabin. She tried to protest, whispering that she couldn't take his place, but he hushed her with a shake of his head. Laura climbed onto the bed beside her mother, curling close. Hollis moved to the fire, building it higher until the flames crackled strong and bright. He brought water, tore cloth, and with rough but careful hands, began cleaning Mary Ellen's wounds. She winced but never cried out. He worked in silence, each gesture saying what words couldn't. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you again." Outside, snow fell heavier, blanketing the world in white. But inside that cabin, something fragile and fierce took root. Laura's breathing softened into sleep. Mary Ellen's eyes flickered to Hollis, sitting by the fire with his shoulders bent forward, his face carved by firelight and something deeper. Loneliness, maybe. Or the quiet ache of a man who had carried too much silence for too long. She wanted to thank him, but shame held her tongue. Still, for the first time in years, she closed her eyes with something close to peace. But peace is a fragile thing. Across town, in the dim glow of the saloon, Elias Carter's voice carried loud and bitter over spilled whiskey. He told anyone who would listen that his wife had been stolen, that the giant rancher had taken her into his bed. He spat Hollis's name with venom, swearing he'd make him bleed for the insult. Men muttered and nodded, hungry for scandal, eager for a story to carry them through the long winter nights. That if this story touches your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply refuse to look away. Back at the cabin, Hollis stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain. The prairie stretched dark and endless, the snow glowing faintly under the moon. Somewhere out there, he knew, Elias was sharpening his anger. Hollis's jaw tightened. His hand rested against the window frame, steady as stone. That he had made his choice the moment he lifted Mary Ellen from that dirt floor. Whatever came next, he wouldn't let her fall again, and so the cabin became more than shelter from winter. It became a battleground of whispers, a place where one man's silence would stand against another's fury. Because outside, in the dark, voices were already stirring. And in towns like theirs, whispers could cut deeper than any blade. The days that followed moved slowly, each one marked by the crackle of firewood and the soft hum of Mary Ellen's voice as she began to heal. Hollis rose before dawn as always, but now his mornings had changed. He wasn't just tending cattle and fence lines. He was caring for two fragile souls who had been thrust into his keeping. Mary Ellen lay in his bed, her bruises fading from deep purple to sickly yellow-green. Her body was still weak, but the fever had broken. She woke each morning to the smell of cornmeal and broth, simple food prepared by clumsy but steady hands. Hollis would set the bowl beside her without a word, then return to his place by the hearth, as if afraid his presence might overwhelm her. She would murmur her thanks, her voice barely a thread, and he would nod once before turning away. Laura May watched everything. She stayed close to her mother, her small hand always searching for Mary Ellen's, even in sleep. But slowly, her eyes began to wander toward Hollis. She watched the way his giant hands split wood with precision. The way his boots thudded steadily across the floor. The way his shoulders seemed broad enough to shield the entire cabin from the storm, and in her heart, a quiet trust was forming. One evening, Hollis carved a small wooden horse and offered it to Laura without a word. Her eyes went wide. She took it with both hands, cradling it like treasure, and whispered it to sleep beside her that night. Mary Ellen noticed these small moments, though she tried not to let her gaze linger. Shame pressed heavy on her chest, heavier than the bruises Elias had left. To be in another man's home. To be under his care. She knew what that meant. The whispers would start soon if they hadn't already. Fallen woman. Shameless. Unfit. The words echoed in her mind like ghosts. Hollis felt the weight of it too. Every time he rode into town for supplies, eyes followed him. Men spoke low in the saloon, though not so low he couldn't hear. Women paused on their porches, their glances sliding across his back like knives. He said nothing. Silence had always been his armor, but when he returned to the cabin and heard Laura's laughter or Mary Ellen's soft humming, something inside him loosened. Those sounds carved through his solitude in ways gossip never could.